saw the title, you already know what it is. Today we're making cotton candy grape wine. I was able to pick up a couple of boxes of these from Costco recently. They had them in stock, so grabbed a couple boxes of those. We're going to start with a half-gallon jar. I'm going to give it a quick spray with my Star San food grade sanitizing solution. I'm just going to make sure this is thoroughly covered in this mysterious liquid. If you want to see how this stuff is made, I can do another video on that. And we're going to let that soak for at least 2 minutes. I'm just going to set that to the side. And we're going to start with a big old bowl of these grapes right here. I gave them a thorough washing, and I didn't sanitize them, but I washed them very thoroughly. I'm going to sanitize my hands. I think you could sanitize the fruit, but something about that feels weird to me, so I just didn't. I'm going to start by just de-stemming them, ripping them off the stems. You can also leave the stems on. That can add tannins. I thought it would be a little more difficult to crush these up with the stems in, so I decided to just take them off the stems. So I'm going to go ahead and separate all these grapes and get them in a bowl. And after de-stemming, I'm just going to make sure I give these grapes a thorough touching with the old fingies. And I'm going to take out this potato masher thing, is what it is. And it's meant for potatoes, and I can totally see why. These grapes seem to be impervious to this tool. They just kind of move out of the way in this bowl. The bowl might be too big, or they might just realize, hey, we're not a couple of potatoes. We're not gonna fold as easy. So I gave up on that pretty quick, and I decided roll up the sleeves, just get in there, start crushing these with my fingers, which seemed to work a lot better. After crushing those up pretty good, I decided to give it another shot with the crusher, because I thought maybe it would be a little better after breaking down some of the grape skins. And it might have worked a little better, but they still kind of just moved out of the way in this big bowl. So I decided to pour them into a smaller container. I'm pouring them into this measuring cup. Some of the juice, trying to separate off some of the juice, and then got a little bit of skin in there, and got more skin. And you know what, I'm just gonna put a bunch of skin in there and all the grapes, and try to get my fingers on these grapes a little bit more. And now that I've filled up this cup, time for that potato crusher once again. And this I think worked a lot better, because now the grapes have nowhere to run to. So I was able to get it in there. I don't know if I recommend trying this at home, because I was afraid I might break this glass pushing so hard on it. So do as I say, not as I do. Buy a juicer, or crush these in some other way. But I was able to extract a decent amount of juice out of these grapes. And I got myself a little mesh bag that I also dipped in the sanitizer solution. And I'm going to attempt to try to strain off the liquid from this grapes, and try to just get a nice clean grape juice out of this. Cotton candy grapes are basically just grapes. They kind of just taste like a grape. If you didn't tell me it was cotton candy, I don't think I would really know. But when you say it, I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, I taste that. They're technically supposed to be like a little sweeter than a normal grape, and they do kind of have this like interesting vanilla kind of note to it. They do taste like cotton candy. They have a unique flavor, but ultimately, it's just a grape. So It's the perfect thing for us to make into a wine. Just making a little bit of a mess here. Anyway, I proceeded with this insane technique of moving it into a smaller container, crushing it, and straining off the juice. And slowly but surely, I'm managing to fill this jar with grape juice. Eventually, I realized if I use a strainer, I can passively strain the juice off. So I switched to this double bowl situation where I'm pouring the mashed up grapes into a strainer, letting the juice fall off, and I'm able to get a lot more yield out of that, a lot more juice into a bowl, and pouring that into a cup because it's a little easier to pour out of, and then pouring that through the juice mesh. And now we're cooking. Now we're making some progress. And I'm able to fill this half-gallon container up with a pretty good amount of cotton candy grape juice. And this juice tasted really good. It has that weird cotton candy kind of flavor to it, but it still tastes like a grape juice, so I'm interested to see how this wine is going to turn out. At a certain point, when I have dried out most of the grape skins, I just put them all into the mesh bag and start squeezing. And at this point I realized I probably should have just done it this way from the beginning. Put all the grapes into the mesh bag and crush them through the mesh bag and strain them that way, instead of doing that crazy system with the potato thing and the cup. But here we are. And now when you do it, you have a little bit more information on best practices here. But to be honest, there's no wrong way to crush the grapes. You can step on them, you can crush them with your fingers, you can use a juicer, you can use a blender. The only thing is, if you're using seeded grapes, I would avoid blending because it can add some bitter notes. But you can pretty much do anything. You can leave the stems in, you can take the stems out. Each method is going to yield slightly different results. As far as flavor, there was not much rhyme or reason as to why I decided to do it this way. The main reason I wanted a clear, clean juice for this, rather than leaving in a lot of skins or leaving in a lot of stems, is because aesthetically I thought it might look a little better on screen. I also felt, since I'm only using a half-gallon fermenter here, that a lot of those skins and things are going to settle out, and so having a cleaner juice at the start will give me a better yield. But you could definitely leave all those things in. It will give you a better tannin quality, which this wine ultimately, I think, lacked at the end. Tannin's a bit of a dryness, a mouthfeel that can sometimes be desirable in wines. Now that we have all this juice, I'm going to run it through the refractometer and check out our sugar level, which initially we read a 15.5 Brix value, which is a little bit low. So here I'm just adding a little more sugar to this to try to get us up to around that 22, 23 Brix mark, which should yield somewhere about around 13% ABV, which is what I'm aiming for with this particular wine. So to do that with the amount of volume of liquid I have here, I calculated I need about 149 grams of sugar, which is how much you're seeing in this little cup. And in order to fit this amount of sugar into this jar of liquid, I'm going to need to make a little bit of room because it will overfill if I pour all the sugar in. So I'm going to pour off a little bit of this liquid, and I'm going to pour it very gently and make a complete mess. This was a bad day to be a paper towel, I'll tell you that much. And after cleaning up a little bit, I have made some room for my sugar additions. So I'm going to just throw that sugar in. And I'm just going to top it off with a little bit more grape juice, try to eliminate some of the headroom and get us a little bit above that shoulder. I probably should have shaken this jar before adding that little liquid in, because it's nice to have a little bit more room. It shakes a little better, and it also is able to get more air into this juice. Here's these beautiful slow motion shaking shots. It's important to aerate at this stage because we're trying to get oxygen in and we're trying to get nitrogen into this solution. The yeast are going to need that in order to help build a successful colony and hopefully put less strain on the yeast. This was less headroom than desirable for this shaking stage, which means I probably didn't add enough oxygen into this, which, not to spoil anything, but may or may not come back to haunt me later. Anyway, after doing a new refractometer reading, we're at that 22 Brix mark, which is perfect. So now is the time to go see what our acidity level is like. A quick pH test yields us about a 3.5, which is perfect. We want to be ideally under 4.5, because things like botulism can grow if it's not acidic enough. But if you're working with grapes or honey, these things naturally are pretty acidic. So if you don't have pH strips, you're probably safe. I just like to check because I like to be extra sure, and it's good information to know. And for the yeast, I'm using K1 V1116. I'm putting in a little less than about half a packet here, just into a little bowl, make it pour a little easier. And adding that to our brew. You can pretty much use any type of yeast you want. There's a bunch of them on the market. I just chose this because it's advertised to do well with fruity flavors. And since we put our yeast in, I am now going to swap out the regular lid for one with a hole in it and shove an airlock in there to keep it from exploding. And it is now time for our yeast to get to work. I'm going to also fill this airlock with a little bit more of that sanitizer solution. This will keep bugs and stuff from getting in, because they can swim through the water if you fill it up with water. Anyway, that's good to sit for a couple weeks while our little yeasties there start to form a colony. With the leftover, I put it into a little glass swing top bottle and just didn't lock down the lid. If you're doing this at home and you don't have all this fancy stuff, this is a totally fine way to do it. Sometimes bugs or something can find their way through a top like that, so it's ideal to use an actual airlock. But if you don't have one, I did it like this, and you'll see those results turned out perfectly fine. After a few days, I was walking by, smelt the wine, and it smelt like eggs, which is a bad sign. That means there's a lot of sulfur buildup, which is the result of strained yeast. It means they essentially don't have enough nitrogen, probably a result of not shaking it thoroughly enough, or not adding any yeast nutrients, which you can also add to try to help with that type of thing. I looked online and I saw there was a method of using copper to bind to those sulfur compounds and pull out some of those bad byproducts of a strained fermentation. So you can take like a copper rod and stir it around, and it's supposed to aerate it a little bit, so you add a little more nitrogen from the air, and you also are pulling out some of those bad compounds. I didn't have any copper. The only copper I could find was this bracelet in my wife's drawer, so I went ahead and grabbed that when she wasn't looking and tied it to a little piece of string and dipped it. And I don't think she noticed.
I thought I put it here. I don't know. I can't find it.
What are you looking for?
My bracelet.
What bracelet?
You know that little copper one that I like? Have you seen it?
No. So I left this in the solution for about 2 hours. You kind of don't want to leave it in there for too long, because since it is an acidic solution, it is dissolving this copper, and you might end up with quite a lot of like metals in there, a bit of a metallic taste. And in worst case scenario, you can get copper poisoning. So, don't leave it in there for more than like 3-4 hours. But it actually seemed to do okay as far as pulling out some of that sulfur smell, and I think it recovered. After a few days, the top started turning a little pinkish, which can sometimes happen with wine. That means it's oxidizing a little bit, which was probably a result of me adding a bunch of oxygen to it in an attempt to add nitrogen to it and get out some of those smells. So I think it's time to rack this A little bit of oxygen's not going to kill us, but in general, you want to avoid oxidizing because it will turn your wine into vinegar, which if you're trying to do that is okay, but we are trying to make alcohol, not vinegar. On the bottom of this container, you're seeing we have a lot of what looks like sand or dust or something. It's a bunch of dead yeast and byproducts of the fermentation process, as well as some sediment that has fallen out. Trying here to just gently lift it and pull some of the liquid off the lees, trying not to disturb it too much, try to keep it nice and clear. I didn't know it at the time, but my auto siphon had a little hole in it, so it was not a easy process pumping this out, and I think I added a lot more oxygen into this brew as well. So as you can see, it shouldn't take this many pumps. That's quite a lot of pumps, and as you can see, I'm agitating the liquid quite a lot, which also helps stir up a lot of this yeast. So we're not looking for a very clear beverage on this one, but it shouldn't affect the flavors too much. And I spilt a little bit out the side. That's not ideal. That's not what you're going to want to do. Eventually, and it is hard. We're hardly getting any liquid out of this. This was a complete disaster of a rack job. And you can see I'm actually pulling up a bunch of the yeast, the lees from the bottom as well into the siphon, which is going to yield us an incredibly cloudy rack and an incredibly cloudy beverage, which is what I was going for. You can see there's a lot of air in that tube. Also, not good. also oxygenating our brew quite vigorously. If you want to just pour it at home, you'd probably have a better results than what I did with this crazy siphon situation. But in general, you're trying not to oxygenate. You're trying not to introduce air. The siphon helps with that process usually. This was just a mess. I had to replace this siphon after this rack, but once you're in it, you're committed. So we're left with what looks like orange juice after this rack into our other container. And a lot of that mud, a lot of that lees, luckily actually did stay on the bottom. So it is cleaner overall, but quite cloudier than is ideal. So I'm just going to pour off a little bit of this mud so you can see what it looks like. This is lees. It's like mud. It's totally fine, totally safe to drink. I took a little sip of it. It has a weird texture, but tastes fine. Tastes just like the wine. So if you're really into not wasting anything, you can drink it. It's not going to kill you. I'm going to test this wine to see where we're at Brix wise and see where we're at flavor wise to see if there's any adjustments that need to be made. Tasting it, it's tasting not amazing. It's incredibly cloudy, but it needs some sugar. This is cotton candy wine after all. So it went kind of dry. I'm going to confirm that with a little refractometer test to see where we're sitting. And as predicted, we are reading 6.5 Brix, which means the yeast have eaten all available sugar. And here's my other test. This one was no added sugar, and this was just sitting in a bottle. And if you're doing this at home and you want to just kind of make something without buying any other extra tools, this is here you go. I'm pouring off the top, which oxygenated a little bit since we didn't have a good seal. So this one's a little more orange in hue, but looks fine, tastes fine, and is fine to drink. So don't worry about that. And drinking it off the bat, this one tastes noticeably thinner than the other one, a little more watery. It also obviously went completely dry as well. For cotton candy without any sweetness is a bizarre flavor. It's not what you want out of a cotton candy wine, I think. So this is definitely going to need some back sweetening. The rest, I poured off into another glass, and you can see the lees I left on the bottom of the bottle. And the hue is a little more orange. It looks a little more orange on one. The other one's a little more yellow, but they taste the same. I really wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And they both are in need of extra sugar. So I'm just adding a tiny little scoop into this glass and giving it a quick little mix with a fork. Normally, if you're going to have these things age or you're going to have them wait any longer, you're going to want to sanitize everything, but I'm going to drink these glasses now, so I just went ahead and used a fork for that. And giving it a try, that is already tasting so much better. And so I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of sugar to my main batch as well, our main brew here. And I'm kind of just doing this to taste. I'm going to put in a little sugar, add it, stir it, and give it a little taste and see if it needs more or less sugar. When you're stirring, you're going to want to try your best not to oxygenate, not to add more oxygen, but you got to stir to make sure it's completely dissolved. So do your best to ride that line. After tasting it, it's starting to taste a lot better. Those cotton candy notes really sing when you have a little bit more sugar in it. So I decided it needed a little bit more, so I'm adding a little more. It's good to go a little at a time since you can always add more sugar, but you can't really take it out. So I'm adding a little at a time, giving it a little sip. I'm also, in an attempt to clear this up, going to add a little bit of gelatin. I'm adding just 1/8 of a teaspoon here into this half-gallon container. The idea is that gelatin can bind to some of the particles that are floating around and pull them out of solution if you cold crash it. That being said, I think you're going to want to do this after you pasteurize rather than before, because the heat can mess with how the gelatin works. And while we're at it, I'm also pasteurizing. Why pasteurize? We are pasteurizing because when you add sugar, that gives the yeast more food, new food, and it's just going to go ahead and kick back off again. So you're going to want to pasteurize or stabilize in some kind of way in order to stop the yeast and kill the yeast from eating that new sugar that you just added. And there's a few ways of stabilizing. You can use chemical stabilizers. You can fortify it with more alcohol, push it past its alcohol tolerance, or in this case, pasteurize. I'm using a sous vide for this, heating this up to 140 degrees and leaving it there for 20 minutes. Once that is done, I let that come back down to room temp and then throw it in the fridge and cold crash it. Although, like I said, I don't think cold crashing worked all that well on this batch. But I have had success with that technique in the past. Anyway, on to the bottling. I'm going to use a fresh auto siphon and a bottling wand. With the help of my mysterious third hand, I'm going to start filling up these bottles. For this, I have a bottling wand. And of course, everything being sanitized as always. As you can see, our final product is quite a bit cloudier, but that shouldn't affect anything besides aesthetics. And after filling up all these bottles, we are left with 3 bottles and a pretty good glass of wine left, which is a perfect amount. I think these are 16-ounce bottles, so relatively small, but that's how I like it because I like to not commit to drinking a whole bottle every time. So it's nice to have these small bottles. I can also age them and store them a little more easily. So after filling them up, throwing on these corks, and our final ABV on this brew is a little less than that 12.9%. Since we back sweetened, it increased the volume and therefore decreased our overall ABV, but we hit about 11.5%. Oh, look at that wine. That turned out very cloudy. More cloudy than I think I would have liked, but didn't affect the flavor. Tasted actually really good. I really like this one. It almost had some grapefruit flavors to it. It did taste like cotton candy. Tasted like, like cotton candy grapes, I guess, which was just delightful. A nice kind of summer wine, very light. Probably could have used more tannins if I'm being honest, but I'm going to save this, age it for a year. Though it was pretty good young, and I think this wine might even be better to drink young, so drink at your own discretion, but we'll be back in a year, and I'm going to go finish this glass. Let me know in the comments what I should brew next. Thanks for watching.